All right, we get to this just in a moment. Just stay with me, everyone. Let me bring to you some of our guests that will be discussing some of this for you tonight. I have joining me the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo, who joins us live from our Abuja studio, as well as Jide Ojo. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. What a night it has been, gentlemen. Perhaps I should begin with you, Samson. What do you make of how this has been? It's 21 states out of the 28 states that we had a governorship election that has now been announced. One state, that's Adamawa, been declared inconclusive. We're still waiting for about 7 states to now be declared and concluded. Samson.
Well, thanks, Sheon. Well, the day has come. The day is almost going, but then, like you said, we've seen some upsets. We've seen some successes. We've also seen how this entire process have not been bereft of intrigues, dramas, and controversies. We've also seen cases where there are contentions as to the application of the Electoral Act, and I know in a short while we'll talk about the margin of lead and this dispute as to which of the legal framework is superior to the other. Is it the Electoral Act or the guidelines used for the elections? But on a sad note, we've also seen how violence, has signposted or defined this election. And it's really disturbing, the level of impunity that we have seen and how politicians have instrumentalized violence, deployed, voter suppression as a way of influencing the outcome of these elections. Quite frankly, a lot of these outcomes cannot stand the test of legitimacy because of the way the process have been managed, because of the way the politicians have attempted to hijack or capture this entire process. And to be honest, and my own personal view is that we've got our work cut out for us as a country, in defining and shaping what a good election looks like for Nigeria.
Jide, what's your view?
Well, yeah, for me, it's a mixed grill. The time has come for us to, again, as we know, there are those who will be celebrating their victories, whether it's well-earned or orchestrated, and there are those who will be weeping and looking for resources to go to court to retrieve what they consider to be a stolen mandate. But I choose to see what has happened more like half full of a cup of water than half empty. I believe we are still progressing, but maybe not at a pace that Samson and I will want Nigeria to be 24 years into this fourth republic. But nonetheless, I believe that, yes, there could have been subterfuge, intrigues, and, underhandlings in arriving at some of those results. But you could also say that generally there have been upsets in many, many states. Look at what has happened in Sokoto State. Look at, in Kano, even in Benue, with all the, what people are taught was an impossible task of having Reverend Father Alia clinching victory as against the governor-backed candidate. You have seen the upsets in Plateau State, where even Governor Lalong has lost his senatorial ambition and has also lost the state to PDP. And it's a misgrill, But one thing that has come out very clearly for me, which I will emphasize, is the sophistication of the voters. You need to give Nigerian voters credit for being very enlightened. 3 weeks ago, in many of the states, we saw the movement, how they voted in Yobe, in Gombe, in Sokoto, in many northern states that went the way of PDP. Today, many of those states have been retrieved by APC in Yobe, in Gombe, in Sokoto, and other places where you have ab initio. 3 weeks ago, the tsunami of Atiku sweeping that. Only very few states have retained their performance from last 3 weeks, like NNPP in Kano, like which other states? Maybe Akwa Ibom. Yes, Akwa Ibom voted PDP, they have retained PDP. But a state like Cross River that was swept by Labour, or a state like Delta that was swept by Labour, or even Nasarawa here, where the obedient movement shook the foundation of, and you wonder whether APC was existent 3 weeks ago. But today, Governor Abdullahi Sule has managed to survive a scare and has been. Then you see how close the contest in Kaduna is. Barely less than 20,000 votes. And we have seen even the closeness in Ogun between Ladi Adebutu Lado and the incumbent Prince Dakwa Abiodun. So the 2023 election has produced its own intrigues. It has produced its own upset. It has also fit into some of the pre-election analysis that we have done about the battleground states, and they have lived up to expectation. Kano, Lagos, Bauchi, and even Delta, that we consider as battleground states, have lived up to that expectation. There have not been landslide and moonslide. I'm not sure you have many states where the margin of lead has been up to 100,000. In many states, it's about 20, 30, maybe 50,000, but either an upset or a near upset. And when you look at even what has happened with the State House of Assembly, Kwara has produced one of the youngest elected female State House of Assembly. And I think in Yobe, you have a 25 years who has defeated somebody who has been there for the past 20 years or thereabouts. So those upsets also matter, because we cannot just give it up that, this whole election results were cooked up and they just announced it. No, there are places, and many of them, I would say, where the true wishes of the people actually were what was announced. And of course, we know if you go by Section 135 of the Electoral Act, it talks about substantial compliance, which is in itself implicating that you are not expecting a perfect exercise.
All right, Jide, just for a moment, we're going to be chewing on some very important data and information about this election outcome, and some of the things that we need to ponder on, especially things that will affect the general outcome and the outlook of the elections. And since being joined by my colleague Kaude Okikolu. Kaude, what a day it's been.
What a day. In fact, 3 days now we've been on this back to back.
This is quite different.
Yeah.
Because this is 2 days away from the election, and we've seen 21 results being declared, and 7 we're still expecting 7, one of which is now declared inconclusive. Right. What inconclusive means is that there will be some kind of election again in that state. Did you ever expect that it's going to be any kind of inconclusive election in 2023?
I think generally for a lot of people coming off the celebration of the Electoral Act 2022 last year, it was a big one for Nigeria, and we thought coming into the general elections we'll have a smooth sail. I mean, these are things we had recorded in the past, and a lot of people, the National Assembly, the civil society organizations, the media, and interested stakeholders worked towards this Electoral Act and thought, for this 2023 elections, we'll get it right. But And I think it would be important to bounce this off our guests in Abuja, how well the Electoral Act has been able to either heal those issues or not.
I want us to dwell on this for a moment, bring them in at some point. For a moment, if you can give us, okay, so we have the figures, of course. This is a very contentious one. The Adamawa State governorship election has been declared inconclusive, and the reason given is that the elections were not held in 47 wards, affecting 69 polling units. Now, this is what Ahmadu Fintiri, the incumbent governor of the PDP, the candidate of the PDP, he polled 421,524 votes, and Aishatu Da'iru, popularly called Binani, polled 390,275 votes. She is the candidate of the APC on the ballot. Can you look at it? The margin between both of them is 31,249. On the record, the PVC that is potentially available for this election in these areas, 69 polling units of the 47 wards come to 37,016 votes. Now, let's flip the page and let our audience understand how we're going to dissect this. For a moment, of course, there are 11 states where governors there are incumbent and are seeking re-election, and so far this is the outlook that we have. Nasarawa State, tick, is gotten a re-election. Gombe, tick, is gotten a re-election. Bono, tick, is gotten a re-election. Bauchi, is gotten a re-election. Buni Malabuni of Yobe is gotten a re-election. For now, Zamfara, not yet declared. Kwara declared, gotten a re-election. Governor Sanwo-Olu of Lagos State, tick, gotten a re-election. Ogun State, Dakwabedu, gotten a re-election. Seyi Makinde, gotten a re-election. Now, Ahmadu Fintiri is not determined yet because that election has been declared inconclusive. This is what we have. But let's look at this for a moment. There is what the INEC guideline says. This is where we need to bring our guests tonight in, and so we need to ponder on it. Let's flip and let's see what the INEC guideline says. Okay, now let's flip to what the INEC guideline says. I'm coming to this in a moment. All right, great, fantastic. The margin of lead principle. Samson, you are the lawyer here. Give us a sense of what you make of this. This is section 67 of the INEC guideline. This is what it says, and I read it. Where the margin of lead between the two leading candidates is not in excess of the total number of collected PVCs of the polling units where elections were not held or were cancelled in line with sections 24, 2 and 3, subsection 2 and 3, Section 47, subsection 3, and Section 51, subsection 2 of the Electoral Act 2022, the returning officer shall decline to make a return until polls have taken place in the affected polling unit and the result collated into a new form EC8D sub A and subsequently recorded into the form EC8E for declaration. Samson, give us a sense of what this means. This is a scenario around the situation in Adamawa State. Legally speaking, what does this mean?
Well, Shehu, there are 3 articles or 3 sections of the INEC guidelines that relate to the application of the margin of lead. The first one is section 62, section 67, and section 100 of the guidelines. And what INEC said is, in the event, the margin of lead between 2 candidates, the top 2 candidates, is lower than the total number of people who collected their PVCs in 3 categories of polling units. So first, polling units where elections were cancelled. And cancellations can be as a result of overvoting. So overvoting is one reason for cancellation. 2, cases where the BVAS malfunctioned and then there was no replacement of the BVAS before 2:30, the election will move the next day. So that's, in that particular case, that particular polling unit will be affected. The third sort of polling unit are polling units where elections were either postponed or elections where election was suspended as a result of disruption on the day of election. So those are the three categories of polling units. So if in the event you have these three polling units, and then the total number of people who collected their PVCs in those polling units exceed the margin of lead between two candidates, then INEC will declare the election inconclusive. The rationale behind that declaration, the inconclusive declaration, it's that assuming those people in those affected polling units who collected their PVCs cast their vote, it could substantially affect the outcome of the elections. That is the position of the guidelines, and as well as the position of the Electoral Act. But if you look across board, Shenwan, some of the reasons that they advance, what is the position of the law as to cases where overvoting occurs? Section 51 is clear that where overvoting occurs, INEC will not make a return until elections have been conducted in those affected polling units. That is the position, of the Electoral Act in Section 51. That's what the law says. But then if you go to the guidelines, INEC also set 8 scenarios for applying the margin of lead principle. Now, these 8 scenarios border on 2 things. One, cases where there is an obstruction, where communities or stakeholders deny INEC, the opportunity to deploy for elections. So if you interfere with INEC's ability to deploy, INEC will enter 0 votes for those communities and those polling units. The second one is where there is violence, in cases where in the course of collation, disruption occurs, or in the course of transmitting or transporting the materials from the polling units to the collation centers. The guideline does not say that where there is overvoting, that the returning officer should enter 0 votes, for those particular polling units. And so what we have seen in the course of this collation process is inconsistent application of these particular guidelines. So if you check the guidelines under Section 100, it outlines the 8 scenarios. But what we have seen in this collation process are situations where there's a misinterpretation as well as a misapplication. And I hope that, INEC's leadership can take into consideration all of these issues, because it's got 7 days to review some of the declarations that have been made in the course of the collation. So this is the whole scenario around, the margin of lead, its application, as well as what the Electoral Act says in relation to some of the issues that have been thrown up, in the course of the collation of the results for this election.
I know you wanted to push a question, but let's get a sense before we bring in Jide back into the conversation. But something, when an election is declared inconclusive, because the case of Adamawa State, this is a relevant portion of the INEC guidelines that reflect what the reason why INEC declared that election inconclusive. But something, when an election is declared inconclusive, it means that a winner has not yet been determined. It means then that in those areas, in this case 67 polling units, as said by INEC, where elections were cancelled, elections will hold. What is the timeline set by the law for elections to be conducted? And will elections be conducted in all of these polling units where elections were cancelled, or polls or ballots were cancelled there?
Well, the law says INEC shall appoint a new date to conclude the election in those affected polling units. That is the position of the law. So the commission will appoint a new date for completing the election, and this category of elections are what we call supplementary elections. So supplementary elections will be declared, and then INEC will have to go conduct the elections in those places. Now, One reason, also for the Adamawa situation was overvoting in those particular polling units, and 67 of them. And you can see that there's a difference between the total number of people who collected their PVCs. Now, this is a new introduction in our electoral legal framework, and it just derives from the new definition of overvoting in the Electoral Act, and that overvoting occurs where the total number of votes cast in an election exceed the number of accredited voters in that particular polling unit. And then the key question is, who are those who are meant to be accredited, on the day of election? It's only people who are PVC holders, those who have their PVCs. And so that was how INEC introduced, the PVCs as part of the criteria for the determination of the conclusiveness of election. So in relation to Adamawa, what the law is very clear, that since the total number of people who collected their PVCs in those 67 polling units exceeds the margin of lead, then INEC would declare supplementary elections and the commission would appoint a new date. So we expect that in the next couple of days, INEC would announce when it will complete the elections in those affected polling units. Only those affected polling units will have elections. All the other polling units where elections have been concluded, there won't be any supplementary elections in those places. The results as declared by INEC, the results as collated by INEC still stand. And so it will be kept aside when the supplementary election is concluded in those polling units, the 67 of them. The results will now be collated and then tallied with the outstanding results that you have. And if the candidates meet, or if a candidate meets the threshold of highest number of votes, as well as 25% in 2/3 of the state, then the returning officer will make a return.
To get clarity on a point you made, INEC has about a week to review the process, the results. Are you saying that even for some of the states that winners have been returned, there's a possibility that INEC might reverse the results if it sees that the guidelines or the Electoral Act was not applied appropriately? Is there a possibility for that as well?
Absolutely. INEC, again, it's also one of the provisions in the Electoral Act that INEC shall review declarations made by the returning officer. So they've got 7 days to do that. But if you check the guidelines, because the guidelines are made pursuant to the provisions of the Electoral Act, and what the guideline says is if the commission receives a report and the commission is convinced, and so for people who have, disputes or have issues with declarations, they've got to file a report, with INEC. And this is why, civil society have said it is important for INEC to issue the modalities, for the review of declarations made in contravention of the provisions of the Electoral Act or where declarations have been made under duress. But as you see in the case of Enugu or in the case of Abia, where INEC has deployed, a team to go to these states to assess or review the situation because collation was suspended in Obingwa local government. These are the kinds of actions INEC would engage in. So there is a possibility. And quite frankly, if any declaration has been made so far and there are people, stakeholders feel that it was made in flagrant disregard of the Electoral Act as well as the Constitution, they've got 7 days to file a report with INEC. And INEC can use its powers to review such situations. But it's got the legal power to do that. Interesting.
So some of the celebrations and jubilations we have seen maybe might need to apply some caution there up until 7 days after. But let me bring in Mr. Ojo. I don't know if it's wishful thinking to just hope that, because we have a new Electoral Act, that this election will not see as much objections and, controversies as we've seen previously. But I don't know if people are taking notes of the amount of objections we have seen, but it looks like a lot for the Electoral Act, which has been described as revolutionary. So I wonder what you think is responsible for that, well, I say lack of uniformity, as Samson has said, in applying those guidelines. I mean, what is applied here might not be what is applied necessarily in another coalition center. In fact, in the Adamawa case, one of the agents actually said for those areas, it wasn't violence. He actually claimed that elections held, but because of overvoting, I mean, zero should naturally be credited to all of the parties because of voting naturally cancels voting there, and there's no need for supplementary elections. So I wonder, looking at the conduct of this election and the objections raised, what are your thoughts? What do you think is responsible for that?
Again, we need to put something, we have to have at the back of our minds that this is the first time this new Electoral Act will be tested at a national level. Prior to now, what we have had in Osun and Ekiti after the coming into effect of this Electoral Act 2022 were just statewide elections where people were just grappling with understanding what the law says. In fact, I dare say by the time Osun and the Ekiti elections were held last year, many of us have not even cited the new Electoral Act beyond the snippets that is read in the media, because the President signed the Electoral Act into law on Friday, February 25, 2022. Ekiti Governorship election held in June, Osun held in July. And you know, the period of time that it took to gazette this law. And now we are having the law being fully tested 1 year into its coming into force. And that's why we saw the volume of litigations that have arisen as a result of the party primaries. I think our Lordship, President of the Court of Appeal, said over 600 litigations arising from conduct of party primaries came to the Court of Appeal. And that is because quite a number of innovations that have come into the Electoral Act are not well understood. So I would expect a lot of contentions will come. People will object to the application of rules as to whether the understanding they have reading some of those sections that you and Samson have pointed to are the true interpretations of that. I also recall that in Ogun State, PDP have kicked that election should have been, the election that brought in Prince Dakwa Abiodun should have been declared inconclusive, given the margin of error, margin of lead, and then the number of polling units where elections were cancelled. But the returning officer felt otherwise. So, again, I believe INEC may look into reviewing that result if there is an official notification from the PDP. But we have to live with this. It's normal. Recall that the 2010 Electoral Act, we had it for close to 12 years. Yes, over almost 3 electoral cycles. So it was time-tested. Lawyers already knew what interpretations judges have given to different sections of that law. Now we are talking of a new law that have even nullified the previous one and with many salient provisions which many of us are trying to grapple with. Even lawyers could not claim or will not be able to claim they fully understood the intent and the interpretation of many provisions of the Electoral Act 2022. So I saw the declaration made in Jalingo or Taraba, and there were different interpretations as to, because NMPP party polling agent was kicking against, collation of some results, and they have to read the guideline, read the Electoral Act, and one way or the other, the Vice Chancellor was the returning officer, made his own interpretations and made his own declaration. So again, we may say what we like. It is said that judges or the court will define what the law is, because that's the interpretative, they have the power to interpret the law. And they may not be looking at those laws in isolation. There could be, like Samson said, the regulations and guidelines were made pursuant to the Electoral Act. And the Electoral Act itself was made pursuant to constitutional provisions. And sometimes you need to have an omnibus understanding of what does the Constitution say, what does the Electoral Act say, what does the guidelines say, to have a very, holistic understanding of some of these provisions. Remember, it's not only in Adamawa that the election has been declared inconclusive. It has also been similarly declared inconclusive in Kebbi, and while the one in Taraba, the one in Enugu and Abia were paused, suspended. I think there is also one other state where the declaration has been suspended. Was it Borno? Of which one?
No, Borno has been declared.
Borno has been declared. So by and large, I guess in the fullness of time, when courts will have made definitive pronouncements on many of these provisions, we will know from maybe the next round of election in November, we will have a better understanding of how this law should be taken.
All right, I just have a few more minutes before I allow Kaude to to ride until I'll be done with my bit here. But let me take you to part of what I would like us to focus on this conversation, and away from Adamawa State is some of the states that have been flipped politically. So this here we are now. We've talked about how many states going into this election being held by the different political parties. PDP had the state they held, APC had their state. But for now, we know that PDP has had now 6 states with River State that have been announced, and 14 states with the APC, and 1 state by the NNPP out of the 22 states that have now been announced. Is 22 now. So if you look at it, Kano State has been flipped politically. Formerly held or being held by the APC with Governor Abdullahi Ganduje of the PDP of the APC, but now an NNPP candidate has won in that state. APC is not the only one that has felt this. In Sokoto State, Governor Aminu Tambuwal is a sitting governor, but that state will now go into the hands of the APC as an APC candidate has won in that state. What about Benue? Benue is similar to what we've seen in Sokoto State, where Governor Samuel Otom is the sitting governor, but now it has been flipped. The Reverend Father is now being declared the governor-elect, and in Plateau State, the reverse is the case. Governor Simon Lalong of the APC is the chairman of the APC, Director General of the APC campaign organization. He lost his senatorial bid. Now the state has lost to the PDP. Mutwang of the PDP has won that state. This is how things stand. Something. If there are, a lot of people who thought maybe we may not be seen as so much upset, but this a political upset that will be affecting how the states hold the grounds in the different states.
Well, Sherwin, if you pull that up and you look at these 4 states, and really thanks for throwing this, if you check the margin of lead as well as the contest amongst those states, you discover, save for Benue, all the other states were keenly contested. So if you look at a Plateau, for instance, I think that for the incumbent governor, he suffered double losses because in the presidential elections, he ran for a senatorial seat, he lost, and then now, in his bid to determine a successor, he's also lost in that bid. And it was a very sort of keen contest. The results, again, are also being challenged. But you can clearly see that where the people of Plateau have decided to pitch their tent. And it's just, for some of these governors, it's a referendum on first their performance, but also how they've managed diversity within the state. Same thing also applies to Sokoto State. I think for Sokoto State, that might be the only sort of little shocker, because everyone thought that, yes, the Governor Tambawal would have delivered his successor, but unfortunately he didn't. The people of Sokoto State chose, to go with the APC. But if you look at, Kano shouldn't be surprising to anyone, because in the last 4 years, in the last elections in 2019, you saw what happened. That election, was concluded via a supplementary election. And as an organization, that observed that election and the way, violence was used or deployed in that particular election, it was very clear that who enjoyed popular support. But then it was also a very keen contest, because if you look at the margin of lead, and like Jide said, in the presidential election, Kano was blue. In other words, it's NNPP. So it wasn't really surprising that they also retained that. But quite frankly, that victory didn't come so easy. It was a fierce battle between those parties. For Benue, it was just clear, from the presidential elections that the APC was going to take the state because of the candidate that they fielded, who seems to enjoy a lot of support, from the vast majority of the people. But also, it just goes to show that the sophistication of the voters. That yes, you had a governor who was part of the G5, who, if he had his way, he would have been in the Senate today. But then he also lost his bid, to come to the Senate, and then also lost his bid, to present a successor as the governor of Benue State. So it's quite interesting. But I must say this as a final thought on this: the fact that you see this flip in these states does not suggest that those elections in those states are actually credible. Because often I think people use the fact that, yes, opposition parties have won elections as an indicator of the credibility or integrity of the process. And I argue that no, it's not the only indicator. There are several indicators. There may be some factors that are at play, but then the fact that an opposition wins a state does not mean that the election is credible. We've got to look at other issues around the way the process is managed. But does that suggest that, yes, there might be some elements of popular support? Yes, it does. But it cannot be the only measurement for determining whether an election is credible, because either an opposition won or a state has flipped from a ruling party to a different political party.
Indeed, there are a lot of things that have changed, but it doesn't look like they've totally changed in its entirety, because if you look at some state, Benue State was formerly in the hands of the APC before the man who led the party in the state moved. Does it mean that the DNA of the APC members in that state have totally changed? These are some of the questions that we need to be asking, and this gets us talking even more when we return from this break. We take a breather, everyone. Stay with me. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us on our continued coverage of the 2023 general elections. The governorship election and the state assembly elections are getting our attention. Just about 3 weeks in the last time the presidential election and the national assembly elections were held, and this is what it looked like. After that presidential election, of course, you see NNPP holding Kano. Of course, we see Labour Party gaining a lot of grounds in several states: Lagos, Edo, Delta, Imo, and so many of the states here, FCT, Nasarawa, and Plateau. But in the governorship election will get our attention now. We're looking at the patterns and what has become of the election of Saturday, and what has emerged as some upset where politically some states have been flipped across the different political parties, and you see the imprint and the footprint of the APC and that of the PDP scattered across the different regions. This is perhaps the first time, politically speaking, you will see Nigeria having this so much color on its political map. And let's get back to the conversation, one which we were discussing on the screen earlier with Jide and Samson, Jide Ojo, an Irad analyst for Channels Television and Yaga Africa, and Samson Itodo, the executive director of Yaga Africa. Both of them are live with us in our Abuja studio. But what we saw and what I was explaining, and what we put for conversation earlier, was how politically some of the states have been flipped. We've seen about 4 states that have been flipped. And of course, you see, Kano, Sokoto, Benue, and Plateau. Samson was giving his own analysis of what really happened. Jide, what do you make of the flip? If anybody says that Beavers or elections does not have any potential of surprise, maybe the fellow has to think again, because for these fellows that are going to be taking the ends of affair from May this year, they really will have done a lot of work to have displaced the incumbent parties in the state. What do you think, Jide?
Yes, you are very spot on. But let me also say, in addition to what my brother Samson here have said, yes, when there is an upset, people should try to see behind the scene what could have caused those upsets. And I will advance a number of variables and factors. One, if you look at Kano, Benue, Sokoto, Plateau, where else? I'm struggling to remember the other states. You find out that in many of these states, the incumbents have served out their second and final term. So it's all for grabs. Once an incumbent is not seeking re-election, it's all for grabs. And that's what players in Sokoto, Tambuwa has concluded is on its own stretch. Likewise, Autumn, likewise, Lalong, likewise, in many other states. And you could see that what you said earlier on about 11 state governors seeking re-election, there has not been anyone that have lost that re-election. The one that potentially may lose from what is available is Zamfara, which an incumbent seeking re-election might lose, and so that is a factor. If you are seeking the election, there is higher probability that the resources will be there for you to seek and battle your re-election, just like you saw in Lagos. So that's one. Two, performance also comes in. Even where you are a first-time governor, if you fail to perform, you may be punished for it by the electorate. Even rigging, it has been generally believed that you can only rig where you are popular. Because if you try to rig in an unpopular area, you'll be hotly resisted and you can pay for it. So performance also comes in. Look at the case in Oyo State. 3 weeks ago, Oyo voted, the entire 3 local government in Oyo State voted APC. The 3 senatorial districts went to APC. Most of the House of Reps position went to APC. But 3 weeks after, it was like they voted PDP on Saturday. Massively, the APC governorship candidate in Oyo State managed to win only 2 local governments. So it talks about the sophistication of the voters. And again, performance. People have said, okay, in Oyo State, Oyo don't serve people twice, or Oyo people don't serve a leader twice. Somebody brought that jinx in 2015. That's late Abiola Ajimobi. But the same Ajimobi, after serving 2 terms, could not win election into the Senate. And out of the 3 senatorial districts in Oyo, he was the only one that lost, even as an incumbent. So it tells you that performance also matters. Then intrigues within the party.
Let me jump in quickly, and at some point, let's cross-pollinate ideas here, and I want the conversation to be a bit fluid so that we can juggle what this means politically for Nigeria, the event that we're seeing unfold. So let's take Kano, for example. If you look here in Kano for the election, there is a consistency. NNPP won in Kano, and NNPP won in the governorship election. Presidential election, NNPP, there seems to be a consistency, and NNPP winning in Kano for the governorship. Let's look at Sokoto. In Sokoto State, for the presidential election, the PDP won in the presidential election, but here, the APC has won. There's something fundamentally happening here in Sokoto State. Let's look at Benue. In Benue, for example, we had a situation where the APC won in the presidential election, and APC is winning here in the governorship election. There is a consistency in that election. So let's go to Plateau State. In Plateau State, the Labour Party won in the presidential election, but now the PDP has won. Is there anything that comes out to you, politically speaking, the dynamics that is playing out in all of these states between the first round of election and governorship election, Samson?
Well, I think 3 things to note. That first, it appears the voters are more sort of conscious, and they appreciate the fact that the closest political leadership to them is the governorship election. And it looks like for them, yes, you've got a presidential, but then when it comes to governorship, we're going to vote a separate way. So it takes, quite frankly, a high level of sophistication. And if there's one thing we would need to learn from this 4 states, Sheon, is the fact that we shouldn't underestimate the Nigerian voter. This outcome tells us a lot about the sociology of the Nigerian voter. Often we make the mistake, and I consider it an oversimplification, about the voting behavior and our collective understanding of where the Nigerian voter stands. So that's one. The second, what would be the implication for national politics? Because we often hear the argument that a state within the Nigerian geographical space is likely to record significant development if they are plugged to the center. Now, how will the governors who are of the opposition manage the relationship with the federal government? Because to an extent, to a large extent, you have a new president. And so their ability to cultivate relationship with the center whilst retaining their identity and their political base will be critical for the next 4 years. And I hope that, be it, the PDP and the number of states that it has, as well as the APC, because you're going to have this sort of, whether progressive governors forum, the PDP governors forum, if you have one particular party that controls one of the states, I'll give a classic example, like NNPP. That will be where will the governor of the NNPP pitch his tent? Will it be, a forum for only NNPP governors? He'll be the lone governor. And if perhaps, like what you saw on the ERAD map, you have a Labour Party currently in the lead in Abia State, what kinds of partnership are they going to strike? And so there's a lot of implications for national politics, because how they are able to engage with the center will be critical to the amount of development that they create within their state. The third critical thing, it's about the ability to manage diversity. Quite frankly, if you look at the state and you look at the margin, whoever lost, or the second or the first runner-up in the party, also controls a strong political base. And don't forget that these matters may also end up in court. So how these particular governors or governors-elect, manage, the politics of their state will determine, one, the stability of their administration, as well as the political stability within the state. Because some of these states are states where there's a record of violence, and also the political environment is quite tense. If you look at Kano, even though the governor imposed curfew, but look at what happened. The people defied what? They defied the curfew. And so it is important that these governors-elect try to manage, diversity. They strike the right political settlements. Because one thing we need to pay close attention to is the kind of political settlements that will be formed and will be established post this election, both at the state level as well as the federal level.
All right, so this is one thing that we were discussing earlier, and perhaps all eyes are on these 11 state governors. Let me walk you through what this means. The states where governors are seeking re-election are the ones that you see in blue: Adamawa, Gombe, Bauchi, Nasarawa, Oyo, Ogun, Lagos, Zamfara, Yobe, and Borno State. And of course, the states where governorship elections did not hold are just 8 of them: Kogi, Ekiti, Osun, Ondo, Edo, Imo, and Bayelsa State. Don't forget that later this year at some point, we will be having elections in Imo, Bayelsa, and Kogi State on the same day. I think that is going to be on the 11th of November, and all eyes will be on those off-cycle elections. And so that is how you have it. Out of all the 28 states where elections held on Saturday, the ones in green are the ones where there will be new governors, definitely. The governors there are not seeking re-election. But let's roll back and look at these gentlemen who are seeking re-election. They're on the ballot, and of course, they are hoping that they will be able to retain their seat. But these are the ones that are confirmed that they will be getting a re-election or have gotten re-election. Of course, Bala Mohammed of Bauchi State, Borno State Governor Zulum, Governor Unuwa Yaya of Gombe State, gotten a re-election. Yobe State Governor of the APC, gotten a re-election. Kwara Governor, Nasarawa Governor, Lagos, Ogun, and Oyo State, they've gotten a re-election. Where we are not able to decide is Zamfara and Adamawa State. Inconclusive, and this is not yet determined. Stand by, everyone. Our breaking news is in another few seconds that we'll be bringing to you. Another result that have been declared, we'll be bringing to you just in a moment. But this is where we are at. These 2 states, these 2 governors are not yet determined. They do not know their fate just yet, whether or not they will get back into office. But then, interesting scenario playing out. Jide, let me bring you back into the conversation. For these states that have gotten these governors gotten re-election, what do you see playing out? There are more APC states than the PDP. Of all these governors, we have Governor Makinde of the PDP and Governor Bala Mohammed of the PDP, and of course Governor Amadou Fintiri of the PDP, but that has not been determined. So 2 of them have not been determined in Zamfara and Adamawa State. Today,
again, it fits into my earlier theory of when a governor is seeking re-election, he seems more strengthened and most unlikely to have an upset politically than if someone has served as a second and final term, and you happen to have brought in a successor or anointed a candidate that is not popular, because that's, in many instances, it's about revolt, people's revolt. Where they are being upset, part of the reason they are upset is people engaging in protest votes. So say, look, we don't like your anointed or endorsed candidate. So we are not going to vote for him. But again, when you look at what has happened in a place like Nasarawa, I think the major reason why Governor Abdullahi Sule may have retained that seat is because he was able to, one, is an incumbent, two, is a Muslim, and the two major contenders within were Christians. We have Labaran Maku and the David guy, and so they would definitely split the Christian votes. So all the and you will have thought that a state that was won by Labour Party 3 weeks ago, that the Labour Party will have a very significant showing. But unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. In this round of election, Labour Party did not even feature as in the top 3 candidates. It's Abga Labaran Maku, former Minister of Information and Culture and former Deputy Governor, and then the David guy from PDP, and then Governor Abdullahi Sule. So ethnicity, religion, tribe, incumbency, diversity, how you manage diversity, and how popular is your candidacy. These are things that voters will reward. We can also not overlook the role of money and other forms of inducement, which have been recorded and documented by a wide range of civil society groups that are the deployed observers. Because yes, there was cash crunch, but people got paid through other means. There are those who got transfers. In fact, I didn't want to mention a particular state in South whose governor paid all the civil servants 10,000, into their accounts. That's vote buying. And there's those who gave out gas cylinders, filled gas cylinders. There are those who gave wrappers and food items. All of this also key into why there are, upset, because it's your ability to, your deep pocket also counts. And also, of course, we should not also underplay the role of violence in some of the upsets that have been recorded, because when you unleash violence in the stronghold of your opponent, knowing full well that the result of such will be cancelled. Cancellation is wherever you have violence or you have overvoting, and you deploy maximum violence. You invade collation center. You do all sorts of intrigues to outwit your opponent. That also may be why those upsets, or as we call them, why they happen. So there is no one size fits all as to explaining how an incumbent seeking re-election managed to get his seat back, or how the political upsets have been able to happen. So there is the ethnicity factor, the tribe factor, the religious factor, the inducement factor, the diversity factor. How was this person a popular choice of the people? You see what happened with Father Alia in Benue State, where even against all projections that the Labour Party was going to win that state 3 weeks ago, it didn't come out that way. Although 2,000 votes or thereabout was what APC used to win that state 3 weeks ago, and it has in fact won by a wider margin. And that's because this was the Reverend Father Hyacinth Alia happens to be a popular choice, as against the choice of the Governor Samuel Otom, who decided to bring in the Speaker of the Benue State House of Assembly as the chair. So people may say this man is not popular with us, but look at what has played out in Delta, where the Speaker of Delta State House of Assembly has managed to scale through and became a governor-elect, defeating Deputy President of the Senate, Omagege. So these are things that you need to have at the back of your mind when you are analyzing politics everywhere, and particularly in Nigeria, where primordial sentiments count for so much. So if you bring in an unpopular candidate, there is no way. Even the NNPP so-called revolution, I think it's the same guy. Samson, correct me if I'm wrong. It's the same guy that flew against Ganduje in 2019 and managed to lose with small margin. I think Gamma Ward was the decider, the supplementary election that was. So the man already has social capital, is very popular, and now he was able to get a new platform, and the mood of the nation. Ganduje is not on the ballot unlike in 2019. So again, once you are serving out you become a sort of once a governor or a president is serving out a second and final term, the choice of a successor, if not carefully managed, can actually lead people to engage in protest vote or to have him, worked for as the natural successor. So look at what's playing out in Zamfara, where Governor Bello Matawalle, immediately after that flew.
Your line of thought, but let's bring in these breaking news. A result alert. Stand by, everyone. A projection that we can call what has been declared and what we know right now in the state of Taraba in northeast Nigeria. We can tell you now that the PDP candidate Abu Kefas has been declared that the governor-elect of Taraba State. He polled 257,926 votes to defeat his closest rival of the NNPP, Professor Sani Yaya, who polled 202,277 votes, and where Senator Emmanuel Bocha of the APC came a third position in 142,502 votes. And this is what we can call a projection that is confirmed and declared. Abu Kefas has been declared governor-elect and returned of the PDP with 257,926 votes against his closest rival, Yaya Sani of the NNPP, with 202,277 votes. That is about 55,000 votes between the PDP and the NNPP in the northeastern state of Taraba. Samson, did you see this coming?
Well, in terms of whether we saw this coming, again, one of the factors playing out in this election in some states is the power of the incumbency. And so to that extent, I won't be surprised. But what is actually shocking is how NNPP is performing in Taraba State. So when you talk about the NNPP revolution, as much as NNPP didn't secure the highest number of votes, but the fact that they came second in Taraba is quite shocking for me, that the APC is coming a distant third. It really says a lot, again, about local politics, that all politics is local, and if a party, fields a popular candidate, then its electoral fortunes may be higher than cases where it fields an unpopular candidate. And quite frankly, I'm really shocked to see how NNPP is performing. That's the second state where it's gotten this highest number of votes after Kano State. Again, the PDP seem to have retained the state, and so there's a lot of work, to be done. Again, there've been protests about this result. So if you also check the margin of lead between the two candidates, there might be some dispute. So I won't be surprised if this again is going to be resolved in the courts. Sharon.
Yeah, what about you? What do you make of this northeastern state and the result that have emerged from it?
Well, just a rider to what Samson have said. Taraba has always been PDP. There has not been any deviation from 1999. From, I think, Governor Jolly Yame down to the one that died in the one that died in the plane crash, the pilot guy, and then the Dan Fulani Baba Sontai, and then his successor down to Darius Ishaku. They've always been from the PDP. It's like Akwa Ibom. They've never deviated. And the same way, Lagos has never deviated from the trajectory of what they call progressive politics, is AD, AC, ACN, and APC. So, again, it fits into the trajectory of if you have a popular candidate, and peradventure, Kefas is very popular. I know part of the reason APC didn't do well is the primaries, the fallout from the party primaries. I watched a video where 3 of the strong contenders for the ticket of APC in Taraba even accused the leadership of Christianization of Nigeria to have collected bribe to the tune of 50 million. You possibly saw that video. So it was a house divided against itself. And so how will you perform? And these are why I talked about managing diversity. Post-primaries is very key. Do you have those who are lost to you? Do you have them working for you after the primaries? Or you just alienated them and said it doesn't matter? I saw a video where Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu in Oyo State went and told Senator Teslim Folarin that, look, you need to do a lot of work. You need to go and beg. You need to go and meet and reconcile yourself with those who contested against you but lost to you. And it was like 2-3 minutes video, but essentially he was talking about managing the post-nomination challenges. And that's what some people don't bother about. So, again, it speaks to the sophistication of voters. Because, remember, I wish we can have the pictures of who, aside from the governorship seat, who won the governorship. In many of the states, you also saw the trajectory in terms of who won the state assembly. In my state of Osun, it's very interesting that all but 1 out of 26 seats were won by PDP, which again fits into Adeleke. Then the national elections, it was a clean sweep. But go to Oyo State, you find a bit of diversity, PDP picking some, APC picking some, and come to Ekiti. Ekiti also presented an interesting scenario where, 23 out of 26 members were APC, 2 SDP, not even PDP, 2 SDP, and 1 Idosi, which was declared inconclusive. So when you look at all these dynamics, look at Anambra, I think Abga was able to manage to get a reasonable seat. Then you go to Edo where you have 13 PDP, about 10 or 11 APC, then 2 Labour candidates, Oredo and 1 other local government. So these diversities, it depends on, because you are dealing with human beings, you are voting for human beings. How did those candidates, how did they emerge? Do they emerge from credible primaries? What is their popularity ratings? What is their track record? What is the party solidly behind them, or there is a division? Look at what has happened in the case of Binani. The only female candidate, but it was a very polarized, contentious party primary.
All right.
So much so that all the men that she defeated decided not to work for her. And in fact, the case was, I think it got to Supreme Court. These are periods that she should have been, using to campaign, having to resolve those and all of that. So these are some of the factors that impact on electoral fortune of any political party. If you impose candidates, anointed candidates on the people, or you look at what has even happened in Enugu East senatorial election, where the candidate initially was murdered, and the INEC had to interdict that and said, bring another candidate. And they brought the younger brother to the man that was slain. And that same younger brother was able to defeat the incumbent former governor in the state. So these are diversities that plays out about popularity, about how people perceive you out there.
Yeah, so I'll bring it on because I have just a few minutes left before I bring my colleague who are going to be taking over on their shift. So, of course, this is the latest that we have in Taraba State. Let me take you to what we saw in River State, announced just about the end of the news at 10 earlier today on Channels Television, where we saw Sim Fubara, the PDP candidate, winning that race and declared winner with 302,614 votes against the APC candidate Tonya Cole of 95,274 votes. And of course, we understand what happened in Kaduna. Yet another very interesting race, of course, it has led to a lot of controversies and a lot of interesting scenario which played out. APC 730,002 votes against 719,196 votes. But the one that we need to keep our eyes on and perhaps look at what INEC will make as their announcement of the next step is Adamawa State, where the election there has been declared inconclusive. And of course, we are learning a lot of lessons from all of the results that have come in. 390,275 votes against 421,524 were Umaru Fintiri, the incumbent governor. Something, and Jide, just before I go, a few minutes for each of your final thought on this one, what IRAD has done for us to be able to track what is happening on IREF. Channel Television has also been keeping tabs on what is happening in the IREF, but IRAD is giving us an opportunity to be able to follow what the results are saying and be able to monitor and as they're coming on this board. So that is what we have. But from your own point of view, gentlemen, up on this moment, in terms of result transmission from the election and the outcome of it, how have we improved generally? Let me begin with you, Samson.
I think there's been a significant improvement. At least the IREV, that's the INEC Election Results Viewing Portal, functioned optimally, and that's our assessment of this entire process. It did deliver on its promise of enabling voters and citizens to download the results. I saw a news report earlier from Channels where a returning officer relied on the results transmitted electronically and jettisoned the one that was presented to him manually, because that is in line with what the law says, that in determining where there's a dispute between results, the one transmitted electronically. I wish that was implemented across board. But then I think the transmission process did work. Beavers also worked optimally. But Sheung, these elections that have been declared inconclusive, it is important for INEC to communicate to stakeholders what is its next line of action, and it should do so in good time and ensure that voters and stakeholders know what is the next line of action. But also in communicating that, also explain, because these inconsistencies in the application of the margin of lead principle would raise fundamental questions. And where INEC, has received the reports and it's in a position and it's convinced that a return has been made wrongly or in contravention of its guidelines, INEC should be courageous to review those declarations, because it would inspire confidence. And following from the way the presidential election is managed, these situations that we are now in some of the states present INEC with a huge opportunity to regain public confidence in the management of our elections.
Jide Ojo, what's your own view about the transmission of results? Do you have anything different from what Samson said?
No. I agree with him completely that that's part of the significant improvement that have been achieved between the February 25 and the March 18 elections. Of course, also early commencement of polling or voting across the country, majorly significant. But let me say this: I'm still highly disappointed with the attitude of our political elite, or whatever you want to call them, the political gladiators. This not in my backyard attitude, invasion of polling collation centers. It happened in Ogoja, in Cross River, it happened in Obingwa, in Abia. It happened even, in fact, there is a news report that the electoral officer for a particular local government was abducted on his way to Gusau to present result just yesterday. Where do we go with all of this? There is a report that about 21 lives were lost to the election on Saturday. Should we be counting because of election people going home in body bags? Even an INEC ad hoc staff was shot and killed. At least these are not something that we should toy with. This rearing of continuous recurring decimal of violence in our elections, voter intimidation, vote suppression, misapplication of rules. These are things that we need to have straightened up by now. This is the 7th general elections we are having in this 4th republic. There are some teething problems we should have overcome. But the attitude of the political class is very, very disappointing. To me, I don't know about other people, they are if there is any all of shame, if there is an all of shame, many of our political gladiators should actually have their names conspicuously displayed in this hall of shame for sponsoring violence against their fellow contestants, against even the umpire. Look at the abduction of 19 corps members in Imo State, the one that happened in Kogi, and several others. Why should we be experiencing that 7th general election in this 4th republic, and we still have documentations, 21 lives still counting that have been lost to this second round of elections alone, 21, according to the document. I think EU said that. I read in the Vanguard newspaper as of yesterday, 20, so it's not far from each other, 21 lives. These are human lives that have been cut short, all in a bid to have a seamless, to have a peaceful conduct of elections. And they have also made the work of the electoral management body more equilibrium by lack of cooperation despite the signing of peace accord.
Jide Ojo and Samson Itodo, please sit tight because I will be handing you over to my colleagues who will be taking over from here. But indeed, if there are a lot of things to ponder on, 1963, Nigeria became a republic. In 1983, there was an election. In 1993, there was another. In 2023, there is another election. Time will not permit me to go into the details of what those three means at the back of all those years, but it really means something in our political development in this country. But this is my time on this bit.